I had the privilege, really the honor, of living, working in Thailand for 6 years. One of the things that struck me, of course, was not only the beauty of the country, but the language itself. And the fact that in my sector, media, I saw that while bookstores were dying here, bookstores were thriving in Thailand, media was thriving, and I attributed a lot of that just to the fact that most of the content in Thailand was still being consumed in the Thai language, in your own script, and so on. Especially working with rural students in your school. And we talk about technology. For the Philippines, it's really, you talk about the internet, it's one thing, everything is in English and so on. Talk about the importance of access and content in the vernacular and in local languages.
Thank you. It's getting better and better, but it's still quite inadequate. You can learn about through Khan Academy in Thai and some of the subjects, but not enough. But definitely one of the things that is very, very poor in my country, perhaps because we were never colonized. Had we been, I think our traffic would have been better. And our English would definitely have been better.
I think Chito will disabuse you of that.
But basically what is weak, and everyone wants to improve it, is English. English, of course, is a language that everybody needs to know. We are very, very poor, and the Thai teachers who are English teachers don't quite understand English themselves, many of them. So today, you'll be quite surprised to hear that we have 10,000 Filipino school teachers in Thailand. So I proposed to the Mechai Foundation to have a Mechai teacher to go around Southeast Asian countries and teach English. I hope the board of the foundation gives it serious consideration, because there is a real need, and it's friendship, and it doesn't depend on the West. It's a tool from the West, that is their language, but we are the medium that can help. Definitely, I think English is what we need. Not only in my country, but you take a look at the ASEAN region as a whole. You can discount Singapore, because that's really not in Southeast Asia.
Okay,
Singapore's in heaven.
Okay, Derrick, first on that point, I'd like to ask that. Is the Philippines losing its edge on the Philippines, or are people just catching up either way? But also, as in being involved in the Ayala schools, and you have schools now in Bicol, again, I would still pursue that question about language and the medium of the education. What have you learned so far about needing to localize content and providing and meeting the students where they are?
Okay, so a few questions here. Let's unpack it. One, where's the Philippines at with English? It's still the #1 country in the world where English is spoken as a second language, still. But two, it's losing ground. Many countries are catching up to it. There's new data showing that. And that's an issue for this country, because from a comparative advantage perspective, speaking in economic terms, this is the #1 comparative advantage this country has. #1 source of GDP is maybe BPOs or maybe it's OFWs, but they both rely on English. So #1 and #2 source of GDP rely on English. That's really critical. It's something that the country can't ignore. What does Ayala Education do about it? Our schools are all in English. Our 7 through 12 is completely in English. We have had a pretty successful track record with that. Years ago, back in the early 2000s, before we ever started Ayala Education, we brought linguists into the country, and we developed a framework for evaluating oral English sensitive to the local dialects. And that framework specifically, that money spent, that research done, has underpinned everything we've done in English, to the point where we now can take a kid who is not thinking in the language, they're predominantly translating, in their head. And we can get that kid to start thinking in the language in 200 hours. And so you have to have an education system that's sensitive to that, and it has a huge impact on wages. We measure the wages of our senior high school graduates as well as our college graduates, and we can tell you based on their level of English what pay bands they'll fall into, because this country pays more for English. BPI has a three-stage interview process. The first interview lasts less than 1 minute. It lasts 55 seconds. I'm giving away trade secrets here. I'm not kidding, this is true. And they're looking for 3 things in those 55 seconds, and one of them is English. And you're gonna be a teller. But how are you gonna interact with the guy from China, the guy from India, the guy from Thailand? Through English, right? So they're looking for it, and you won't get through the door to be a teller if your English isn't good enough. So it's a commodity, and you have to deliver it in the Philippines, because for the Philippines, it's a comparative advantage.
Okay, we only have about...
Can I wrap that? I don't disagree with Derrick. English is important, comparative advantage for the Philippines, but many times, because I've seen English as a declining skill, the solution has been, let's teach English from grade 1. Let's return English to the way it was. I think we need to clarify that the decline of English is not just a decline of English. It's been a decline of the entire education system. As a matter of fact, math, and believe it or not, Filipino skills, our national language skills, have declined even more than the declines in English. In recent years, the improvements in basic education have seen better improvements in English and math and Filipino. The problem is, it's so much easier to identify English weaknesses than math weaknesses. We don't go around asking people to multiply or to, but English you see right away, right? But if you look at it, it's an overall decline of the system. And to put too much emphasis on English is to ignore the fact that the problem has been a decline in the overall state of education in the Philippines, and therefore you ignore a whole bunch of other skill sets, which actually is a sign of a lot of things happening globally. The mass public school systems in many of the countries, including Thailand, has seen declines in their quality. State is giving less and less importance to state-run, government-led basic education systems, which really is, I think, the more against our interest, because we focus on college, but it really is the more important place to focus, which is on basic education.
Okay.
I want to put data to that. Can I put data to that? We take in kids in grade 7 and grade 11. There's very little difference in their mathematical capabilities. So when they come to us in grade 7, typical average kid cannot multiply or add fractions successfully. That's the upper limit of their math. It's not any different in grade 11. He's right. So mathematics is not any better. It's just not as obvious. And we see this because we take kids into the APEX system at grade 7 and grade 11, and they're basically stalled.
Yeah, just to clarify that point, in the APEX system, I take it a lot, most, maybe all of your students are basically indicative of the quality of public education entering your school. Is that right?
The vast majority, yeah. Most of them come from the public school system, and they're stepping up. They're getting into private education at a low cost.
In any case, in your school, in your system, you see immediately the gap between the quality of public and private education. How do we close that gap? And if there's any insight from Thailand on how did Thailand raise the quality of its public school system, and how might there be some sharing here, not just between the Philippines and Thailand, but with other developing countries as well?
The first one is that when subjects are down, students are turned off. I would like to suggest that we try out a special incentive system. Let's say maths. If you when you do well each period, you get to choose a very good menu for lunch or for break, ice cream, go to the movies. And then kids will work harder towards some incentive. Give them some incentive. There's no incentive. We do not tell kids why they're at school. We cannot tell them how learning math can help your future in any way at all. So we have to relate it to their future. That's the first one. And we're going to try to teach other things. Now, for instance, Kathy was here. She was a chess champion at 10 and then at 12. Why not teach chess in every school? Make it compulsory as part of a subject. Then your brain will start working a bit more. So get them to be more questioning. But to me, the best way to get education improved is not to depend on the organ, the Ministry of Education. It's tired. It means well. It's a bureaucracy. It's like a big oil tanker carrying Shell product. Very hard to turn around. Very hard to turn around. So I would like to suggest that we take a look at two things. One, to see what a school can be. A school is a real diamond, but we're treating it as a piece of glass. Firstly, most schools, I'm talking about rural schools, have land underutilized, have buildings underutilized, have teachers underutilized. Most schools open 200 days a year. There's so much space. And there's no organization that has such support from the community as the school. So here is the place that we should realize that we can turn things around, not only in education, but to use it to do many, many things. That's the first one. The second one, so one is changing the role of the group. The second one is to go for new partners. And what I would like to suggest, and we're trying this out now, luckily the Prime Minister has agreed, to ask the private sector and the universities to come in to help basic education. The government, I've said this roughly yesterday, the government will supply the budget for these government schools, and the private sector will come in with some additional budget, and you can deduct twice 200% from your tax, and improve the education system. The school board will come from the private sector and university and other smarter schools. And they will learn many things. And you can even get professors who are on sabbatical, lecturers sabbatical, who come and act as heads of the school or co-heads of the school and get real practice, because a lot of professors don't know how to manage. This would be a good way to learn how to manage. Except when you're at AIM, that's a different matter. So here's the point. We need new partners coming in, and then you will then get the ideas that exist in the private sector. You will have their staff, you will have their schools, their companies as possible workplaces. All these things we need to do to change education. Unless we do that, we're not going to catch up, and we're all going to be labor, and many of us will be functionally literate in language, but not only that, but also mathematically illiterate. That's even higher, a high 40%. So getting the private sector coming in, they will know what sorts of people they want. They will tell you, and they will help to produce them. Now these schools can also be what I would like to call career academies. If you want to be a nurse, why can't you begin at grade 7? Why do you have to wait till grade 12? So you have the basic subjects and intermix it, integrate it with the biology, with disease, with food, with other aspects. And then every Saturday you work at the health center to learn experience from real people, and 6 years of it. Or you want to be a real smart farmer. Companies who are very good at agriculture can help to turn certain schools and the kids in those schools into future farmers. But in every school, you must teach kids how to do business. Because in most of our ASEAN communities, in mine in particular, 70% of those who finish education at whatever level, 70% do not have employers. Yet we do not teach them how to be self-employed and at the same time how to stay at home. So education must try to prevent migration. At the moment we are destroying the villages like a chicken. The only chicken left is a chicken without feathers in the village. All the feathers are gone, packed out. So these are the issues that I think we have to address. We need new partners coming in and new approaches.
Okay, Chito, Chito is also with the Philippine Business for Education. Anything here that you learned, or are there a lot of things actually that are already being done in terms of public-private, in terms of education and the private sector coming in? My high school, by the way, was turned into a mall by Ayala. UPI. And I'm not complaining.
It's beautiful.
No, I'm not complaining. I say this in all seriousness. It's a fantastic mall. No, but also I saw the new building for UPIS, and I saw where the money went. I also got to understand a little bit more how the revenue goes into the state university and provides more resources. But this goes precisely to the point, not just of bringing in private sector help, but also understanding that notwithstanding the fact that the Constitution requires us to have the most budget for education, that for the time being and the foreseeable future, that budget will always be one thing. So from the perspective of Philippine Business for Education, Chito, maybe you could share with us some practices and things that are already worth highlighting.
Well, first, the mall is probably where the high school students go anyway. So, I think we need to reconceptualize even the way the private sector works with education. Historically, it has been education. The private sector main contribution has been resources, providing money, providing facilities, etc. to the education system. But today, because of the way the world of work and the world is changing, we need to change the way the private sector relates. I think, first of all, for example, in the Philippines now, with the onset of K-12, all of a sudden we have a whole bunch of kids graduating from high school who are skilled enough to take entry-level jobs in companies. But many private companies are still not ready. They still are looking for a degree. Rather than looking for a skill set, they're looking for a university degree. And so you have a whole potential population of kids coming into the workforce who might not get jobs, not because they don't have the skill set, but because there's a demand that is put on them that is not necessary. The second thing is, in terms of work, bringing work into the school, historically it's been internships, OJT. It has to go beyond that. We need to see more and more of the private sector teaching in universities because they're more equipped with the most recent technology. We need to see the private sector providing openness to the facilities. And there are many, many examples of this. Texas Instruments has a very big program with the universities in Pampanga, where the teachers teach in the universities and the students get to start to learn, not just in third or fourth year, but as early as first year. It's almost like there has to be a melding between the workplace and the systems of learning, so that there's almost no differentiation. They can continue to continue to learn, even in the companies that they're going to. But we really need to open ourselves up. Many times companies don't open themselves up because they're worried about technology, they're worried about intellectual property. Schools also hesitate because they're worried about their faculty being pirated. But we have to merge these worlds much more closely.
Is there a barrier, or on the other side of that question, are there incentives that that government is not exploiting or experimenting with enough to get the more private sector participation in education?
I'm not aware of any incentives, but maybe I'll turn to Derrick because I think the Ayala entry into education is to a large extent that model. They needed human resources for their company, so they said rather than just recruit, why don't they start developing these human resources themselves?
Where's Clems Antonio? Where are you? Stand up. There, stand up. There. Everybody applaud her. Her sole job at Ayala Education is to connect industry and academia. That's her sole job. Her sole job is to walk into employers and unlock the door and then create a bridge between the two. We have a bunch of employer partners. Ayala does not hire most of our graduates. They couldn't. We have too many graduates. But right now, we're about to have over 2,000 kids graduating from senior high school. We have identified employer partners. She has identified employer partners with over 5,000 open jobs for senior high school students. That's what you got to do, and it's hard. You'd be surprised. We have partners who like us and they're friends, and yet we got to sign NDAs and wait months and months to get in and understand their work. But we go in, her and I go in with other folks, and we go in and we look at the jobs and we look at the thinking that's going on in the job, and then we reverse engineer that into curriculum. We're about to take every one of our colleges and do this for the 2022 graduates, and in a very specific set of employer partners that are marquee to that college where they will, for example, BPI, simple banking, right? So if you've got somebody ready to go to work at BPI, they're ready to go to work at BDO, East West Bank, you name the bank, right? So you just pick one key partner, you go into their business, you develop a close partnership, they get, what do they get for that? What they get is they get your top graduates. But then they open up their doors, you learn what they really need people need to function, and then you reverse engineer the thinking. Because it can't just be skill, because skill's constantly changing, right? It can't just be knowledge, because knowledge is cheap. You have to reverse engineering the thinking that makes those workers successful backwards into the right level of your curriculum.
Quick question, Ayala Education is a for-profit entity?
Yes. I would say for a modicum of profit.
Yeah. No, I asked because I think it goes to a fundamental question, especially for the private sector, of, speaking of incentives, what's the business case for this? What's the business case for a businessman to say that I will invest in education?
Yeah, so for Ayala, our number one goal is nation building. Our number two goal is to make money. And the reason behind that is, if you are always seeking NGO funding or something, you're only going to get so big. If you have a profit motive, you can get as big as you want.
Yeah, but beyond the motive, my question is, can it be profitable? I mean, is it worth the investment beyond CSR work? And just looking at it as, well, from the perspective of inclusivity, which is not supposed to be CSR, which is basically saying there is a market down there that we can service. In your case, I mean, I was surprised to read this, what, $150 per student per year?
For the technology. Our technology.
For the technology.
Our technology.
Yeah, but it's still a very affordable, it's a very affordable senior high.
Yeah.
But beyond the goal, the vision, and nation building, I don't mean to denigrate it, but I mean to ask it on a very pragmatic level, and also for the benefit of this forum, and trying to encourage people, hey, look at this. I mean, don't discount this possibility. Can you make a profit?
I think given what Sir Mechai is saying, I think precisely we need less philanthropy and more businesses to come in, because I think businesses can innovate. Let me speak for our own examples. We only charge $600 a year, which is about $15,000 per semester for college degrees, and our kids come to us with a grade 4 math and competency level. But our board passing rates are now at about 75 to 80%. Our employability rate is 75% after 6 months after college. So our results, our academic results are showing, and we're still doing about a 35% EBITDA and about a 20 to 25% net profit margin after tax. So it is profitable. As a matter of fact, I think it's the profit that drives us to innovate. It's very clear the market we want to serve, 75% of our students come from the D and E markets. The E market is only about 8 to 10,000 joint family income per month. So that's 75% of our market. For us to charge tuition fees that low, we need a sense of business which will drive and manage our schools properly. And I think that's what's been missing in most education systems. Education, health and education are among the most inefficient organizations in the world, mainly because of a whole bunch of other organizational factors. But I think a strong sense of business, a strong management perspective, actually allows us to innovate and to manage them so efficiently that we can continue to keep our costs, our tuition fees low, and yet make a decent profit. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left. We'll take questions from the floor. But first, I'd like to bring in Dr. Mechai. Continuing, yes, please.
The first one I mentioned earlier, what we call a partnership school, where the private sector goes in and helps operate a government school. No charge, no fees to be charged at all. It's got to be done in another way. But let the kids realize that they're getting an education, and they can also give of their labor to something else, somebody else. Unfortunately, free education in many areas, tertiary education, is not free. You have accommodation, you have board, lodgings, and all those things. So kids in Thailand are able to borrow. There's the government bank that lends them money, but there's been problems repayment. So I have proposed, I hope some people listen, is to let them repay by doing community service. You calculate how many per hour, you do this in tree planting, helping to teach kids in rural areas and in difficult areas. And then finally it comes to what I would like to suggest is that the word corporate social responsibility has been going around. It's a bit like honesty amongst politicians. It's talked about the performance is below par. Corporate social responsibility, unfortunately, in my experience with many companies, they have a small division of people, small unit handling it, and nobody else in the company is involved. So for it to work, it must be a total policy. That means everyone must be involved. Therefore, we need ISR, individual social responsibility.